Hey there, this is Byron Jones, and I'm recording a video for my series, One More Thing Before I Go. Today I'm going to start with a family history discussion. So my grandmother, Virginia, was really one of the sweetest women you could imagine, kind of the quintessential grandmother. She had, I believe, 8 children, and just a hardworking Southern woman. And I was the oldest grandchild by several years, so I kind of got her to myself for a while when I was a grandkid. But when she was a little bit older, in her 50s, she had decided to divorce my grandfather. Everybody in the family kind of understood why she got a divorce. She was such a sweet woman, but unfortunately, my grandfather was not the nicest man to be around. I think she just got kind of tired of it. And, I remember a little bit about it. One of the things I remember was that my mom and my aunts were talking to her, and they were like, we understand why you're getting a divorce, but you're a woman in your 50s. You may never be married to a man again. You might be alone for the rest of your life. And my grandmother was basically like, I'd rather be alone than married to him. She eventually, though, through church, met a wonderful man named Earl. And Earl was kind of everything you would want in a grandfather. He was a super kind, sweet man. He had his own family, of course, by then, and wonderful children of his own. He was Scottish, which was perfect for our family because it blended right in with our Scottish ancestry. And Earl was kind of everything you would have hoped for in a new grandfather. Earl had prostate cancer. It was advanced by then already, not curable. But my grandmother knew going into the relationship that he had that, and even when they got married. And they had a good number of extremely happy years together. I remember at Earl's funeral, my grandmother was sitting next to me, and she couldn't hardly speak, but she whispered in my ear, and she said, "I just wish I had a few more years with him." And it's interesting because, obviously when this happened, Earl's passing, I was still fairly young. I'd say I was maybe 13 or 14. Because at the time, I had no idea some of the parallels in my own life that I would experience, based on my grandmother's own life and her experiences. So back to my life. So when I was 19, I went on a date with a man 21 years old, we're basically about the same age, and quickly had a relationship with him and basically married him on day one. We were together. He moved in almost immediately when he wasn't at school and so forth, and we were together for 34 years. But I will say, and without getting into details about the marriage, I kind of realized maybe 3 or 4 years in that I wasn't as happy as I would hope to have been. And the challenge there is, especially when it's kind of your first real relationship, I felt safe in some ways, but I also guess looking back on it, I was kind of scared to be alone. And I should have taken my grandmother's advice, which was I'd rather be alone than be married to that man. Back in early 2015, I got a job back in Miami, so I moved back to Miami, but just by myself. And that was really the first time in my life, at 44 years old, that I was alone, having to live independently, completely independently. And in some ways that was a good thing because it kind of opened my eyes. One, it gave me a little bit more courage to be alone. And 2, it sort of started bringing my relationship with my husband into perspective. And eventually, I kind of made the decision that my grandmother made, which was that I would kind of rather be alone than stay in a relationship that wasn't making me happy. And so I got a divorce. Now, around that time that we ended up finalizing the divorce was when I started noticing the symptoms that would later be diagnosed as frontotemporal dementia. I'd already noticed for a while a certain amount of loss of mental acuity, some memory issues, and to be honest, I thought a lot of it was just getting older. And to be perfectly honest, I got divorced with the hope that I would eventually find someone else that could help me to be happy. It was like I had this giant void, like a big pit in my psyche where like all of this love and stuff that I had needed for a very long time was kind of missing. And I was always looking for people to fill that void in. You know, I found my husband. I'm like, your job is to fill this void and give me the love that I need. And when that stopped working, I found someone else. I'm like, your job, fill this void. I realized eventually that you can't find other people to fill that void for you. I have to complete myself as a person and not have other people filling that void for me. No one can fill that void completely for you. You've got to work on healing yourself and dealing with whatever emotional and scars and baggage that come along with 54 years of life. I did a MRI with the doctor, and then a week later they're like, we need you to come back in right away. We need to do another MRI, which is never something you quite want to hear. And called me in and basically told me, one, you've got damage to the frontotemporal cortex part of your brain, which for those who aren't familiar, that part of the brain handles language, higher thinking, what we would think of as sort of human consciousness mostly resides in that frontotemporal cortex where all of our higher thoughts occur. And the other thing, they were like, oh, but wait, there's more. You've got a brain tumor. Now, to be clear, the brain tumor, they think is a benign tumor. It's like not malignant, but it's right by the brainstem where the spinal cord passes through the skull. And so it's pressing up against the brainstem and the spinal cord. I'm losing dexterity in my hands. My handwriting is almost illegible at this point. And I'll drop things. It's like especially I notice it more with the left side, that I'll just drop things or that I don't have dexterity. So at some point, maybe the brain tumor will need to come out. We're just keeping an eye on it. They told me at first I have frontotemporal disease, and they said they won't declare it dementia for about a year. And basically what they expect is during that year, there'll be some sign of progression, some sign that it's getting worse, maybe new symptoms and stuff like that. I'm experiencing these episodes where it's like the language part of my brain just either malfunctions or shuts off. Sometimes I'll lose the ability to speak. Other times I lose all language. That internal dialogue that you have in your head, when you're thinking to yourself, that will just disappear. It's kind of weird. When it happens, I may have, a minute or two of like dizziness before it hits, kind of enough to know that something's about to happen. And then silence. Just complete silence. I can't read anything. I can't understand words. I can't speak. When you have literally no words in your head, you can't think without words. The first 2 times it happened, I was just so disoriented by it. I didn't fully understand what was going on. The 3rd time it happened, I was at home, I was sitting down, and I was able to kind of stay calm. And even though I couldn't think with words, I was able to, process what was happening. It's like I was aware that I had no access to words. I'd gone out to Palm Springs with some friends and had a little bit of conflict with them that I didn't understand exactly what had caused the conflict. I sent them text messages asking if we could meet up to talk about these things. And from my perspective, we never met up. We never talked about anything. I felt like my friends were like refusing to talk about what was going on between us. And it kind of hurt, and I didn't understand why they weren't talking to me about these things. And finally, I ended up seeing them at a friend's wedding and asked if they would please sit down and talk to me again. And they did, and I started talking about the things that I'd wanted to talk about, because I'd made some notes from the trip to Palm Springs. And one of them interrupted me. He's like, we've already talked about this twice. Why do you want to talk about it a 3rd time? And that kind of blew my mind. I'm like, what do you mean? We haven't talked about this before. And he started listing off the things that I was about to tell him. So clearly we'd had a conversation, and I had no memory at all of the conversation. And that kind of freaked me out, because A little bit of memory loss is one thing. Not remembering visiting your friends twice, that's a lot more major. While I was waiting for the testing, another thing that happened was a friend of mine called me on a Wednesday down in Fort Lauderdale, and he's like, we had a great pool party this weekend. We missed you. Why didn't you come? And I told him, I don't know. What did I do this weekend? I'm like, I have no clue what I did this weekend. I must have done something. And for like 30 minutes, I could not think of what I had done all weekend. I checked my phone, I checked my calendar, I checked Facebook. And my calendar said Friday afternoon, fly to Las Vegas to go see the B-52s in concert. And I checked Facebook, and I've got all these photos and videos where I'm out in Vegas with a friend seeing the B-52s in concert. I flew back from Vegas on Monday, and on Wednesday, when that friend called me up to ask what I had done, I had no memory, zero memory at all of going to Vegas. I've got photos, I've got T-shirts, I've got stuff that I bought at the concert. No memory at all of ever being there. I would go on dates with guys, and usually by like the second or third date, just because I'm pathologically honest, I didn't want to lead anyone on, I would always tell people, I'm like, I've got frontotemporal dementia. And it pretty much always ended the same way. The gentleman would be like, thank you for telling me, that's not what I'm looking for in a relationship, and that would be the last date. The ones that were a bit less gentlemanly about it would just kind of ghost me. And I got to the point where I was like so frustrated by it, I was pretty much ready to just give up on dating. And I'm like, I'll have friends and enjoy life and not worry about dating. A funny thing happened about 3 months ago. 3 months and 2 days, actually. I actually know that. So I was out at a bar in Fort Lauderdale. And to be clear, when I go out to bars, I almost never drink. In an entire year, I may have 4 or 5 ounces of alcohol. I know all the bars by how good their Diet Coke is. I had gone to this bar, and I saw this guy standing by the dance floor, and he looked familiar, but I didn't know exactly who he was or what his name was. I went up to him and I said, are you Joe? And he says, no, I'm Jerry. And we start talking. It turned out we were already Facebook friends, that he had known me for a while. And we kind of hit it off that night. And as a Facebook friend, he already knew that I had frontotemporal dementia, and he wasn't going to go run screaming. The interesting thing Jerry told me a bit later was that he had been seeing me around for months, and apparently he had told one of his friends that he had hoped that someday I would come up and talk to him. And so, in a way, it's kind of funny, that I went up and talked to him, not really even knowing who he was exactly. We started seeing quite a bit of each other, and today marks our 3-month anniversary. I'm older, I'm wiser now, and for me, the fact that I'm marrying Jerry after only knowing him for about 3 months doesn't bother me in the slightest. Jerry's older than I am. He's been married too. We both are going into it knowing full well what being married is like. Jerry had actually been planning to ask me to marry him in July on my birthday, and I was planning to ask him to marry me on August for his birthday. But after the election, and with the concern that things may change politically in the U.S. to where marriage wouldn't be an option, I asked him right after the election, I'm like, let's go ahead and get married. And he said yes. Fortunately, I'm kind of like Earl. Earl had, after they got married, Earl had several wonderful good years to offer to my grandmother. For Jerry, I have hopefully several good years left to offer him. When you're a young person, and you hear wedding vows and they say, till death do us part. When you're in your 20s, hearing till death do you part, it's kind of an abstract thing. You don't really think all that much of it. It's like, it's just tradition. When you get in your 50s and 60s, till death do you part, it's like, okay, well, let's get this done. We're not going to wait around. We're going to get married. We're going to have ourselves a whole lot of fun and adventure. Don't be afraid to take a plunge every now and then. I know a lot of people, like especially for marriage, they're like, I've just got to find the perfect person that'll complete me. And they're in their 40s, they've never been married, and then they're wondering why they haven't gotten married yet. They're looking for the perfect person. The perfect person exists in Disney movies. They do not exist in real life. I'm not perfect. Jerry's not perfect. I'm not looking for perfection from him or vice versa. The one thing I told him is, I can't promise you that I'm the perfect guy for you. I can only promise that I'll be honest and that I will try, and I'll put in the work to try to make the relationship work. One thing that someone asked on Facebook, they were like, what causes relationships to fail? And this question came up like right around the time I got divorced. And my answer to that was what I call tiny little matches. Nobody walks into their relationship with, a giant can of gasoline and a torch and just burns their relationship down. No, nobody does that. The way that relationships end up getting destroyed is tiny little matches, being inconsiderate, being unkind, saying hurtful little things, not looking after your partner's needs. And it's just one little thing after another. Relationships can last for years and years and years with just a little bit of damage here and there, constantly building up and building up. Throw a match, it leaves a burn marker on the floor. Throw another match, it leaves another burn mark. If the relationship goes on long enough and you throw enough of those little matches on the floor, eventually one of them's going to catch fire and burn the whole thing down. I know in my relationship with my ex-husband that that's what happened. Eventually there was just one thing that was enough to make me say enough. The only thing I regret is that I didn't see the tiny little burn marks for all those years that kept building up and building up. And to be absolutely fair, I threw some of those tiny little matches myself. So we both participated in it. And so going forward with Jerry, the most important thing I think is to remember, don't throw those tiny little matches. Be consciously aware, be considerate, be kind, be thoughtful, communicate. I'm hoping that will help us to have a more successful marriage than either of us had with our first one. The one thing I see with Jerry though is, Jerry's 65 and he and I are both the kind of people who are still growing and learning and becoming new people every day. Anyway, I've rattled on a good bit today. So that's today's story for One More Thing Before I Go. Talk to you later.